Hi, I'm Daffodil. I make video games, I ride unicycles, I create art and music, among many other things. This past June, I released a video game called STREET UNI X on Steam, and it's a PS1 styled extreme street unicycling game that I worked on for just about 6 years. It's on Steam right now, you can buy it. So you should go buy it. There's a free demo. You can check it out if you haven't already. And this talk has to do with this game. So the first part of my talk concerns playgrounds, banal public space, and how we interact with and relate to that space from my perspective as an extreme sports doer. The ideas here intersect with my approaches to designing levels for games that prioritize movement and spatial interaction. And this is not to say that this part of my talk won't be relevant to making other sorts of games. So I encourage you to approach listening to the following with an abstract sort of disposition. I'm also a child of the rhizome, so please forgive any disparate senses of connection and maybe a sense of lack of flow that may come up here. So let's start with skateboarding. It is a sport where the rider rides around on a board on wheels. They pop the board up into the air, they move themselves and the board about in so many flourishes called tricks. Skateboarders perform these tricks in a variety of spaces. Spaces for skateboarding include skate parks. Skate parks are spaces, sort of like playgrounds, created with the intention of moving about that space in the act of play. Playing involves flowing through the park, jumping onto and over obstacles created for grinding and sliding and hopping up, over, around, and under. When you see a skate park, it looks like a skate park. I think most people watching this video would not confuse the images on this slide with other sorts of spaces. Skate parks have deeply codified signifiers that we comprehend as a place for skateboards. Skateboarding, however, isn't the only sport that involves moving on, around, through, and over such obstacles and spaces in these sorts of ways. BMXs, inline skates, and skateboards are all unique modes of spatial traversal, and they each have their own unique capabilities when it comes to spatial navigation, interaction, and flourish. These modes of traversal of space have been represented in unique ways in video games before, with diverse and different mechanics. Featured here are 3 examples of some games that came out around the era that include mechanics that are unique to their mode of traversal and their unique sport. STREET UNI X is evoking these sorts of different modes of traversal. So not all spaces are made for navigating in the mode of extreme sport, like skate parks are, though. Part of our lives here in the banal, sterile, urban scape of cities like where I live in so-called Vancouver includes moving through spaces made as passages to or from places of work. Schools, office buildings, car parks. Rarely are these spaces made with play explicitly in mind. That said, when people engage in the play of extreme sport, they become to reinterpret these spaces through a new lens. They begin to see these spaces as potential sites of play. They see new possibilities. A handrail becomes a grind rail. A road barrier becomes a quarter pipe and a launch ramp. A broad bench becomes a manual pad. They start to imagine the possibilities of these spaces intuitively, at a glance. I call this sense of intuitive spatial interpretation stunt goggles. There's so many ambivalent, sterile, lifeless urban spaces, and they are made with the intention of being corridors for herding workers to and from their places of earning excess capital for their corporate overlords. To those without stunt goggles, these places are empty, cold, or simply nothing at all, being merely passages where we engage ourselves as automata, passing the time, and dreaming of the moment where we get to return home and rest. And if we're lucky, engage our creative possibilities and desires. Stunt Goggles shows us new possibilities for these spaces as we move through them. Stunt Goggles makes obvious to us the opportunity to engage with these spaces in the mode of play, to deny the ambivalent, cold lifelessness of brick, concrete, and asphalt, and endow these spaces with life through the creative act of stunting. Now, as a quick aside, which of these is for sitting? You see a chair on the left and a windowsill on the right. For most of you watching, I imagine this is an obvious choice. The one on the left is for sitting. It is shaped in the way we know chairs to be shaped, and chairs are the object of sitting. But is that the whole story? What does it mean to be the object of sitting? Does it have to be shaped like a chair in order to carry the capability of doing sittability? The windowsill also presents with as much capability to be sat on as the chair. Both objects, both spaces, present the possibility of sitting. Both present the readiness for our connection in the mode of sitting. In this way, the chair is the skate park of the extreme sport of sitting, whereas the windowsill is akin to a street spot of sitting. Continuing with this line of thinking, skate parks are like playgrounds. Playgrounds abstract and amplify the diversity of shapes, structures, and ways of moving that have been present in our lives in many ways, some less common nowadays than they used to be. Walking up strange steps, moving across rickety bridges, hanging from branches and beams to swing our way across gaps and chasms. They look like a place to play in the way a chair looks like a place to sit. They are built often with clearly designated lines, which dare and invite the child to move across them in explicit and particular ways. And the child will move about the playground in these ways, but they also move about in undesignated ways. Hiding under the bridge, climbing atop the tunnel of the slide, weaving through the rungs of the ladders, children are engaging their stunt goggles in the playground. And at the same time, often when children engage with other spaces in the mode of play, they are told to get down from there or stay still, etc. It's interesting though, because when building game spaces, which in a sense are playgrounds because we play games, sometimes we as game developers try to mask the fact that these places and spaces are for playing. We try to present them as the same banal, lifeless urban spaces we're used to for the sake of realism in all its banality, in all of its dreary, capitalistic automation. Since extreme sports has to do with a sort of rebellious play within spaces not intended for playing, when building levels for an extreme sports game, I find myself engaging with a sense of masking the playability of the space, with a veneer of the sense of banal realism so prevalent in our dead, lifeless, real urban spaces. In STREET UNI X, I utilized banal spaces I was familiar with traversing in my day-to-day life as these masks. I utilize these spaces as the banal veneer, and I abstract them and mediate them through the dream of game. This is to say, I pull pieces of their banal spatiality and I mutate them into the realm of the playable, while leaving behind enough of the banality to ensure the place looks like a school, like a train station, like a skate park. To reproduce a sense of space, in the sense of building a level for a video game in which navigating the space is the mode the game is played, there is a tension between building the space to be seen as playable and building the space to be seen as realistic in its banal presentation. For example, this downtown level is based on a real skate park here in so-called Vancouver, but it is vastly abstracted from its actual layout and structure for the sake of being more playable within the possibilities of the mechanics afforded to the player in this game. Whereas in the outdoor parking lot section of the indoor park level, the sense of playability was forgone to induce that more banal sense of dreary, empty lifelessness that compels us to read a space as realistic. This level is a playground explicitly. It is called the indoor skate park. So the outdoor section gets to be explicitly in contrast to that sense of playability compared to the indoor section. Now, when designing spaces with playability in mind in the mode of extreme sports, there are key considerations that come to my mind. Flow is one of these considerations. Flow is, does this playful engagement lead me to another playful engagement? Does this grind rail lead me atop, over, under, or through another opportunity to engage playfully? And does that next opportunity lead me to another, and another, and another? And two, does the end of one opportunity present me with only one new opportunity? Or are there options? Does the line bring me to a space where I get to choose multiple other lines? How many? Presenting players with that sense of choice engages their creative play and cultivates building their sense of stunt goggles within the capabilities of the mechanics of the game they're playing. The masquerade of playground, pretending to be banal urban space, induces the creative vision in the player and teaches players that there are more opportunities than they believed possible at first. An interesting consideration when it comes to designing spaces in the aforementioned ways is that the mechanics of the mode of engagement, the affordances the player has access to in terms of their capabilities of interaction, directly influence the playability of a space. STREET UNI X, for example, is inspired by, but not strictly reproducing games in this tradition of extreme sports. Since I unicycle myself, and I engage in stunt-oriented play on my unicycle in my day-to-day life, I wanted to make a game that engages with the nuance of unicycling. Skateboarding is very different from unicycling. Skateboards move faster, are lower to the ground, have the capacity to play on ramps and quarter pipes in ways that are quite different even for expert unicyclists, and quite difficult even for expert unicyclists. That said, unicycles and skateboards have an overlap of shared capability and shared language of interaction. Unicycles can grind and ride on rails, hop onto and over ledges and stairs, coast across flat sections, similarly to manualing on a skateboard, etc. The thing is, because you are all undoubtedly much more familiar with the ways skateboards move through, on, over, and around spaces, as a designer of a unicycling video game, I'm tasked with teaching you the ways in which unicycling is different in its spatial capabilities. Unicycling connects with and moves across space at a different pace and a different posture than skateboarding does. Teaching the player the nuance of these ways posed a challenge to me, and is part of why I decided to explicitly teach the mechanics in the form of a deliberately entirely abstracted space in the game's tutorial. At the same time, there is a sense of implicit instruction in the less abstract levels. For example, in this section of the downtown level, there includes a wall that is the ideal height for grinding, and it creates a loop with gaps between wall segments that dares the player to grind it and hop between segments and carry on their grind, building a combo and fueling that sense of, gosh, aren't I creative? This wall in the second level is a moment in which the game has clicked for many players, where they realize comboing is possible and begin that process of interpreting spaces in the mode of play, flow, opportunity, and creative engagement with the tools available to them via the game's uniquely unicycling mechanics. Some other more subtle aspects of guiding the player to play involve hinting at and guiding players visually without explicitly telling them we're guiding them. In the first level, the water treatment plant, there are brightly colored pipes and ledges that invite the player to engage with them. And in contrast, a more subtle way of flagging the possibilities of engagement of a space is through contrast and lines within a texture, like on the ledges on the screenshot on the right, where there are visible grooves in the ledges that invite the player to connect with them and grind across them in the direction in which they flow. All of this said, games take time, effort, and patience, and all of these things are more and more expensive, especially to those of us struggling to stay afloat in this capitalistically predatory society while prioritizing our creative pursuits like game development or athletic play, etc. Iteration is required to build a level that compellingly flows in the sense we consider good design, and that iteration costs us our time, especially when creating aesthetically diverse spaces. Daffodil and Friends is, in the case of Street Uni X, a roughly 3-person team. We built the majority of this game with no budget, just for the sake of making it, so it was necessary to reuse assets in new spaces and new contexts in order to make possible the scope we were seeking to manifest. Benches became reused all over. Ledge textures became wall textures. Bushes became potted plants. Construction buildings became foundations, became school bleachers. Warning flooring became parking lot gates. In order to finish making this game, the priority of reduce, reuse, recycle had to constantly be in mind. Now this brings me to the next part of my talk, staying interested enough to finish. It's hard work working on the same project for a long time. So for this segment, I'm going to hand things off to my friend Daffodil. Hi, I'm Daffodil. I play video games. I do unicycle tricks. I'm transgender. I'm non-binary. I am socially outcast. I'm a weirdo. I'm a clown. I'm different. What the hell am I doing here? Well, I'm here because I'm obsessed with unicycling. What are you obsessed with? In this section, I posit that no amount of time feels like too much time when what you're spending your time working on and engaging with has to do with your obsessions. It is easy to focus on something that you love and that you care about. When you're excited, it's infectious. It triggers the empathy of others to become excited for and with you. People want to engage with others who care because we care about each other. And isn't that sort of why you're listening to this talk today? Because you care about the opinions of other game developers? So, like I said, I'm obsessed with unicycling. I also love extreme sports video games and have as far back as I can remember. In my opinion, from my perspective as a unicycle-obsessed extreme sports fan, this subset of extreme sports games has been dormant, and it deserved an homage, and I believed I had the skills to make that happen. Basically, even though I eventually did receive funding from the generous folks at Weird Ghosts, I believe that I would have finished building Street Uni X whether I had received that funding or not. It just may have taken me another year or two. Now, as independent developers, especially those without the privilege of funding or savings or supportive parents, etc., we often have to work day jobs. Given our skills, we have the option to work tech-related and game dev-related jobs. But in my experience, and in my opinion, working these kinds of jobs that engage the creative skills we wish to use on our art has a tendency to steal away our energy that we wish to utilize on our own projects. Make no mistake, tech jobs pay well in money, but I have found that they pay little in spiritual enrichment. In contrast, I had worked as a barista for the bulk of Street Uni X's development, and I did so because a cafe job is social, community-oriented, and through the connections I made with regular customers from my local community on a daily basis, garnered me the resources, care, and support that I needed to sustain my mental well-being while pursuing my own most creative desires in the form of projects like STREET UNI X. With that, I discovered that as I was learning to unicycle, it was easy for me to engage with unicycling. Every ride was an opportunity to learn something new and improve myself, and it kept the experience fresh and renewed my passion for unicycling, which I got to pour into building STREET UNI X. Watching unicyclists online post new clips of new tricks kept me inspired and gave me new ideas to build into the game. I am always already thinking about unicycling, practicing unicycling, and dreaming about unicycling. That said, not everyone makes games about things they actually enjoy participating in, and I believe that as players, we can tell when the developer doesn't care about the thing they're making. There are so many games out there that we could probably agree are asset flips or shovelware, etc., whatever you want to call it, made by folks looking for a quick sale, or, piggybacking on some trend that they believe will earn them eyes on their project. I believe that this is a problem. It will suck the love out of you and your creative pursuits. Also, people learn about us through engaging with our work, whether we choose to put ourselves in there or not. We are in our work, so we may as well make our work about something we love and that we are passionate about. I also think that looking back on our history of creative work is nourishing and motivating to our creative drive now, whether the work was finished or not. I have made a handful of games prior to STREET UNI X, many of which I, at the time of completing them, considered them prototypes or side projects, not worth the same celebration as games I was inspired by, created by others. But that was the perfectionist in me speaking. Worrying about making things perfectly and letting that stop me from making them now prevents me from doing the work to make them, and looking back on them and being nourished by that work that I did later. My work wasn't polished, and I didn't even feel comfortable calling it finished in the case of my video games like Virtual Blinds or Beak, but I had cared about what I made, so it didn't matter to me that it was finished, and it didn't matter to the people who played those games. I believed those projects were cool without being finished, and other people told me so as well. And when it comes to being cool, that's not some category that has rigid criteria. You may feel like you're normal and that being normal isn't cool, but I believe you're not normal, and I believe that it's good that you're not normal. If I were to prescribe something in this talk today, it would be to engage with what makes you different from others. Engage with what you care about. Realize you have a style and a voice that is uniquely yours, whether you deliberately engage with style and voice or not. Just be you. Pursue your cares, and that style will present itself whether you see it or not. To be cool is to be true to yourself. So stop trying so hard to be someone you aren't. Others living their truth inspires us. We are nourished by others who love what they do and keep doing it. We celebrate one another where we are at, and we recognize that it takes effort and time to get to where we wish to go. Also, it takes time to get good at skills. We don't learn to walk the moment we fall out of our parents' womb. We have to try and think about it and be encouraged and go to sleep and try again and again and again. I believe it's a good idea to recognize our abilities where they are now, where they have gone before, and where we wish them to go. And with that, scope our projects according to these abilities, while delegating ourselves a little bit of room to grow. Most importantly though, I believe we gotta be patient. Like I said, it takes time to get good. It's not shameful to be inexperienced. It's not shameful to make something small. It's not shameful to celebrate our baby steps. Everyone was inexperienced once. You get to experience through doing it, So go do it. And that's my talk. Let's ride. I can't wait to see what y'all make. If you make something cool, if this talk inspired you, feel free to leave a comment, connect with me on social media if you can find me. And yeah, thanks for listening. Go play Street Uni X. Free Palestine.